Headline edition, July 8, 1947.
We're having luck, but other sightings apparently were taken more seriously.
And one in particular, an incident called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, also known as Britain's Roswell. This was in 1980, shortly after Christmas, when a few American airmen who were stationed in the UK...
Team, I'm your host, Vinny Adams. The following is an interview with Robert Fleischer. Robert is a German UFO researcher and journalist covering all aspects of the UFO subject. I had the pleasure of meeting Robert in Paris, France in November 2023 at the ECHO conference. I'll put a photo on screen now of Robert, myself and Christian Van Heist, the commercial 747 pilot. If you enjoy this content, as always, please like the video, subscribe, comment below and share it with your friends. I really appreciate it. It means a lot. I hope you enjoy this interview with Robert Fleischer. Robert, thank you so much for joining me. How are you?
How are you, Vinny? Thanks so much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure.
No, it's good to see you, my friend. We were lucky enough to hang out in Paris back in November of last year at the ECHO conference, which I thought was a really good event. So let's start there. I just wondered if you could give your kind of a verdict on what you thought of that event, because I'm sure you've been to many kind of conferences and that over the years, and I just wondered if this one was any different or any kind of standout moments from it.
Yeah, it was very different. So what you need to know is that in France, even though they have these the National UFO Investigation Body, which is called GEPAN, Group for the Study and Information about Unidentified Aerial Phenomena, or something like that. The UFO study, the civilian UFO study, is not very well developed in France. Like, you have certain UFO clubs in different regions. You have stuff like les repas ufologiques. So that's the ufological dinners. That is when they invite speakers, and while those speakers are speaking, that people are having dinner, which was a real weird experience for me when I went there in 2012 to go to meet Robert Salas in a shopping center in La Défense in the north of Paris. So that was really, so this and the civilian side of ufology is not very well developed, surprisingly. But this event that we both attended at the Sorbonne University was quite different, right? And I have to tell you, I studied in France for a year, so I understand the French mentality when it comes to this subject. And this is just a groundbreaking that this happened at the Sorbonne University, which is like the foremost, most important or most well-known university in France, right? So the mere fact that this could take place at such an important place was a real game changer in France. And now you have the French former intelligence service boss, Alain Juillet, who went public discussing UFOs and saying this is a global phenomenon and hinting that they know stuff as well, you know. So I really think that this has really changed the game and how this is being talked about in France in particular, and I hope that this will have some long-term repercussions as well to the neighboring country, Germany. But you know, in Germany we say hope is the last thing that dies. You know, because the German situation is quite different.
Yeah. No, we'll touch it. Excuse me. Yeah, we'll touch upon Germany shortly, but let's just segue into another conference that I believe you attended, which is the Sol Foundation sort of inaugural event over at Stanford University. So would you mind just sort of telling us about that? Any standout key moments and people that you liaised with and connected with while you were there?
So that was only 2 weeks after the Paris event, right? So I met them all again. I met Jacques Vallée again. I met Christopher Mellon again, and a number of other people I had never met personally before. And it was really amazing. I mean, I guess your listeners, your viewers will already know everything about this event. But let me tell you, coming from a country where the spokesperson of the government bluntly laughs at your face when you ask for UFO files, and the German Ministry of Defense tells you there's no such thing as UFOs, which we were not able to fully identify after having detected them on radar, and then you go to the US, to the Stanford University, and you sit there among like the most important people in UFO research at all. I mean, look, there was this one moment when I was sitting there, and Professor Nolan, had just presented his analysis results from a what was it called in English? Atomic probe tomography or something, of some metallic slag that he had analyzed with this new method, and he found that this is definitely artificially designed. It's not a natural. It's not the product of some natural process or something. And after that, there was a Q&A, and a man stepped up to the microphone. He was to the right of me, just 2 meters from me or so. And he said, look, he presented himself as a person working for a very well-known corporation in the defense industry. And from the science and research department of that corporation. And he asked Professor Nolan whether this material that he has just presented is the same that Eric Davis had already presented to them. And so Professor Nolan said, no, this is something we just came up with last Friday. And so that person said, okay, so if this is something that could potentially be used for shielding, then I would be happy to talk with you in private about this afterwards, And that was the moment, when I was like, holy cow, I mean, where am I sitting here? So next to me, to my left was sitting an investor. To my right was sitting a very well-known fighter pilot. So you had all the people that have something to say in this field. You could not know who is intelligence except for the people that who are intelligence, of course.
Yeah.
So it was just absolutely astounding that if you see this, like they were literally not talking about whether this phenomenon exists or not. They're not losing themselves. They're not wasting their time with this question that is still being debated to this day in Germany,
Yeah.
But they were actually talking about how to regain control over those rogue programs, dealing with the crash debris, and how to prepare mankind, and how to avoid catastrophic disclosure of this technology and all of this. I mean, this is, it just was like I was feeling literally like in a parallel dimension, So I think what the Soul Foundation is doing, this is like the most important thing you can currently do in the whole field to promote it. And not promoting some alien speculation, some wild, outlandish claims about where it comes from and what they do, but promoting the fact that this is a real thing that we have, that has to be debated because it has so many repercussions, and it is a subject for science. It has been ignored by science for so long, and it needs to be discussed scientifically. And that's, by the way, also what I'm trying to do with my work in Germany, because I keep interviewing people, scientists, experts on this subject. So I'm not so much into individual UFO sightings. And I think the repercussions are far wider ranging than just crashed UFOs, people from other planets.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it's very important that science takes this seriously. And I think we have been seeing that more in the last sort of few years. But around that time of the Soul Foundation, we were leading up towards the end of 2023. And obviously we had a lot going on with regards to the National Defense Authorization Act in the US with the Schumer-Rounds Amendment. Excuse me, which obviously it kind of got stripped out, and we were left with a few bits of policy that actually did get signed into law, as it were. But what were your thoughts about that whole process and some of the language that was initially sort of put into play that didn't make it?
Yeah, so what didn't make it was the idea of a civilian review board, which would decide upon release of formally classified files. and there was another. There was the eminent domain passage that sought to expropriate corporations that are in the possession of crashed non-human intelligence material. And to some degree, I have to say this was already predictable when you attended the Seoul conference. When I attended the Seoul conference, I mean, we had Colonel Carnell, who was presenting the Schumer Amendment, and there was this one. I mean, we were not allowed to film this or to take photos or something, but there was this one slide that leaked where he presented this plan for control, this disclosure campaign, with the outcome of regaining control about all this and avoiding catastrophic disclosure, which I just mentioned. And then at that point, I think when he was finished, Jacques Vallée stood up, who was in the audience, and he said, "You cannot do this. This is confiscation. You cannot just walk into my laboratory and take my stuff and give it to some other scientist. This is not how science works. You know, this has to be worked over." And also, the definition of UAP is quite strict, quite very narrow, and that may include even religious artifacts. That's what Jacques Vallée said. So even from people who are positive about disclosure of this, there was some fierce critique about the Schumer Amendment, especially the expropriation, the eminent domain passage, and also Christopher Mellon made it very clear that during his talk at the Seoul Foundation that who is telling you that the net benefit for society would be positive, that there would be any benefit for society if we would disclose this? If those are not angelic beings, which our radar data does not suggest, then what is it? And that all leads to the question what it is that they actually have to disclose, you know. And so I was not surprised that the Schumer Amendment would fail in the form that it had been prepared for. And I understand more now, having been at Stanford at the Seoul Foundation event. I now understand more the need to really prepare this and to think about how to do it, because I can see it. I mean, I can see it in my small world here with the German target groups. You know, if you tell them about crash retrieval stuff or something, you know, they will just not be able to process that mentally, you know, because they're still in the mindset of there's no such thing as UFOs. We are the brightest candle on the cake. That's what they believe, you know?
Yeah.
So how do you, and think about all the religious groups, you know, think about them. And then also, what if this subject is actually extends to far more than just military encounters, you know, craft that fly around in military operation zones and stuff? What if this is a historic phenomenon that has always been here and that is even partly responsible for some of the most important religious events that are described in the Bible? Like, you know, who actually, who gave Moses the 10 Commandments on the Mount Sinai, you know? So just think about that. So I'm not saying the UFOs are God. I'm not saying, and God is actually an alien, you know. But what if those phenomena are actually related? And that would mean that we would have to revise large parts of our history, and we would have to find ourselves completely new in what is our role on this planet. What is, you know. And so I think that the repercussions, and this is just the socio-cultural repercussions, let alone the economic repercussions and sociological. I could tell you a lot about this. I talked a lot about this with experts from the German-speaking world. So, for example, there's an sociologist, Dr. Andreas Anton, who wrote a book which is also available in English language about exosociology, which deals with 3 scenarios in which mankind could get in touch with extraterrestrial intelligence. and even though he excludes the UFO phenomenon as one potential scenario, he talks about a signal, an artifact that could be found, or some craft somewhere in space. He doesn't even talk about UFOs, but even in the event that some alien artifact with some potential technology behind it could be found, he predicts severe potential consequences, severe repercussions. There could be martial actions. There could be war. Also the legal repercussions. There's not any law in the world that you could look into to see what to do in the case that some alien craft lands on the White House lawn, or on the Kremlin, on the Red Square in Moscow, or whatever. Where do you look? What is that? There's not a single law. There's nothing. So, and then think about the economic repercussions. Just
Sure.
one thing. If there was a non-human intelligence that decided to start trading with one single nation on the planet, let's say Uganda. Uganda would rise up to be the most powerful nation in the world by far, because they now suddenly possess a technology that is so much more advanced than what all the others have, that they are basically invincible. And that would that would be a turmoil, let alone the role of the US dollar as the main world currency, that is still the world currency because many of the oil businesses is paid for in US dollars. What if there's some free energy device that makes it, that just then you just wouldn't need a US dollar anymore. So there's so many consequences. Hal Puthoff also mentioned that at the Stanford event, that he had assisted a conference already 10 years ago or so, or a couple of years ago, with many experts dealing with the question of how could we possibly disclose this to mankind. And they separated into different groups. Each group of them took care of a single branch or single subject, like the economic repercussions, religious, what have you. And they made a list, positive, negative, and then they all came back and said, well, the negative potential outcome or the negative repercussions greatly outweigh the positive ones. So even for us, he said, even for us who were positive about disclosure, we just had to give the advice not to disclose anything. So yeah. So I really do see the need to try to find a plan on how to disclose this to mankind. In a way, I've been doing this myself. How to present this subject to the German audience so that they're finally starting to at least play with the thought that they may not be the only ones. It's not so easy about, but yeah. So. Yes. So let's see what happens with. The Schumer. We were talking about the Schumer amendment. This is not the only avenue that you can go. And Charles McCullough III, who is the legal counsel to David Grush and the Soul Foundation, who was also present at Stanford, he said that. He basically said something like, "Don't be sad if it doesn't happen, because even if they were implying this or putting this in, signing this law into power, that wouldn't necessarily mean that anything would change. Because Congress writes up some legal text doesn't mean the intelligence community will obey. So I think this is a long process that has to be." There's gonna be years and years, but there is no way back. I'm sure about this.
Yeah, you raised so many interesting points there, and when I think about this from a personal stance, I let me just go back on that. I hear everywhere that humanity's not ready and things like that, and I certainly wouldn't a statement out like that speaking on behalf of 8 billion people. I believe I'm ready to hear it, but I think it's also important to understand that this is so complicated that if we were to get disclosure, it wouldn't necessarily be what we expect, what we want to hear, and it might actually be more scary than maybe we could kind of comprehend. So I always kind of sort of try and bear that in mind when I'm talking about disclosure. And I think you're right. You know, it would need to happen over years rather than an instant boom. Here it is. Deal with it.
And excuse me, may I add something to this?
Yeah, sure.
To the scary, potentially scary stuff concerning disclosure. So there is 3 areas for me. I would say the one of the scary thing is you remember that Luis Elizondo mentioned on several occasions that people in the Pentagon avoided this subject because they saw some demonic force behind it. You know,
Sure. Yeah.
And what if this is? I mean, if you listen to Jacques Vallée, he says it looks like a social experiment, like a meta-human control system. You know, what if they are exerting some influence on us, on our development, our general development as a society? What if they are shaping our belief systems? I think Diane Pasulka is saying same thing, right?
Yeah.
Now think about the jinn in the Quran. You know, the jinn, the invisible demons that come from the invisible and that try to, you know, that influence people by suggesting things, by, you know, what if this is related? You know, what if we suddenly wake up in a reality where we find out we are being influenced the whole time by some invisible forces? You know, wouldn't that be scary? And also, what is also scary is the potential effects on, or the potential legal or potential political actions that could be undertaken by some governments if it turned out that some of them were already living among us in human shape and form, and you wouldn't even notice. What if that were true? I'm not saying it is true. I'm saying, what if that were true? I'm not so much scared about them walking among us. What I am scared about is that we are going to be obliged to make PCR tests at every corner just to prove that we are humans, you know? So this could be commercialized by the same industry that commercialized the PCR tests during the coronavirus crisis, you see? So there's the industry is just waiting for some moment like this, you know, for some new market that opens up, you know, and will oblige us to forget about human rights and all of that. And actually, so this is what I'm scared of as well. Yeah, I forgot about the third point though. Anyway.
No, not to worry. You know, I think at the end of all of that, I still think that we deserve, as the public, to know the truth, whether it's positive or negative, to allow us as a species to move forward and develop into something bigger and better. You know, the way things are going, the way I see the world is we're not going to last that much longer with all the war and destruction of the environment and everything like that. So I still see it, whatever happens, that it would be a positive. And I hope that the disclosure process would be played out in a reasonable fashion that makes it less the less of the ontological shock for certain areas of society. So, yeah, well, listen, Robert, I think it would be interesting to kind of jump right back and focus on you a little bit more, because I'm really interested to hear more about you, as I'm sure the viewers and listeners are. So let's take it right back and sort of what got you first into this subject of UFOs?
So I was 16 years old when I met the famous Swiss author Eric van Däniken, Chariots of the Gods, you know. He was in my hometown and gave a talk, and at that time he was really famous in Germany. Because I'm from East Germany, you need to know that East Germany, until 1990, his books were forbidden in that country.
Wow.
Which didn't prevent people from reading it, you know, because they were copying it and distributing it in secret among. So many people in East Germany were reading his books. So there were many people who wanted to have autographs when he arrived at the hotel lobby, and when they were all gone, you know, I stepped up to him and because I wanted to tell him about my big theory of everything that I had at an age of 16 years. It was like I think it was about the universe expanding and reducing itself to and expanding again. It's like a heartbeat or something. And he said, yeah, I know that. It's a heartbeat theory. I read that before. It's Frank J. Tipler. And he advised me to buy a book about this. And so we started to talk. And so we were standing there for like an hour and we were talking. And then at one point he said, look, there's friends of mine sitting on that table waiting for me to join them. And I said, I thought he wants to get rid of me. And he said, you want to join us? I said, yeah, sure. So we sat on that table and we continued our discussion, and he just completely forgot about his friends.
Wow.
Yeah. And so since then, we met, we had met numerous times whenever he was in my region. And then for a couple of years, we lost contact. But then in 2007 or 8 or so, we got in touch again, and since then we've been friends. I've interviewed him several times. He even interviewed me once for his show. So he is basically the person who got me very interested in this, because I said at the first evening when I saw his talk, and then after that we were meeting again. We met in the hotel, we had this discussion, then there was this talk, and then after that we were sitting in a hotel bar or something, we were talking about this, and I said, Eric, if this is true what you're saying in your presentation, so why isn't that on the evening news? I was naive. I was 16 years old. I was thinking that whatever happens in the world will be reported on the news. And he said, look, this is, with his Swiss German accent, this is, the zeitgeist. Zeitgeist is a very difficult thing, so the journalists, it doesn't get into their heads. But why don't you become a journalist? Why don't you go and report on this? And so I went home and I said, hey, that's a really good idea. I'll do that. So I started right away to become a journalist. So I made my first journalistic internships in a local newspaper at the age of 16, and then another newspaper, and then local. I presented local TV show on my local TV station in that in my hometown, and then I went on to other, always doing internships and freelance, and I worked for national TV, and then for more important national TV, and for some news shows like Spiegel TV, ZDF, and then finally for MDR television, which is part of what you have in Great Britain, like the BBC,
Right. Yeah.
And I'd always wanted to report on this kind of stuff, but they would never let me. Like, it was really. It was just, even when I was really good. I was at one point, when I was doing an internship at the ZDF local public network, I was working for a docu-feature format, which is called ZDF Reporters. And the boss of that show was the same person, Steffen Seibert, who eventually would become the spokesperson of the German government.
Right.
And he was very open to that idea, but he said, look, it's really difficult to report on this. So how should we do this? And even after that, but I never kept up trying it. But at one point I just gave it up, and I said, okay, it won't work. So I'll just found my own online publication. So I founded Exo Magazine TV, where I tried to report on the stuff on UFOs and all of the paranormal and all of the implications, using the same journalistic standards and methods that I'd been taught while working and using while working for television, mainstream television. And and I've been doing that for 16 years, and then always from time to time I've been invited to some TV shows or asked by some TV shows to give interviews, and most of them were not really interested in the subject. But then last year, when David Grush came out with his revelations, or shortly before that, actually, there was a very big mainstream news magazine called Focus magazine in Germany, who contacted me and asked me whether I was willing to contribute with my reporting about UAPs to their magazine. And I said, let me think about it. And I did. And so now I'm contributing from time to time when they ask me about UAPs. And I think without that reporting in Focus magazine, people in Germany wouldn't have, or the general population in Germany would not have learned about such important events as David Grush's revelations and the Soul Foundation, and even the Tim Gallaudet statements recently.
Sure.
They asked me to write something about that as well. So things are moving very slowly in Germany, and I'm trying to make it go faster.
No, that's really encouraging to hear, because, we all know that the mainstream media in the US has picked this up kind of post 2017 following the New York Times article. But as far as, I'm aware here in the UK that it's been a real slug to try and get the mainstream media, A, to cover it, but B, when they do, to try and cover it in a non-sensationalist way. And it seems that we're still struggling with that to this day. I think we're starting to see a little sea change, but it's not quick enough. But that's encouraging that we've got someone like you in your country, putting forward credible information to these publications. So that's great. It would be remiss of me not to talk about World War II and the Germans, and did they have highly advanced technology in these, underground laboratories and stuff like that? Because people always say, oh, well, yeah, the Nazis had flying saucers in Antarctica and these kind of really far out conspiracy theories. I'd love to hear your views on that, as to whether you think there's any legitimacy to it at all.
So the Nazi UFO thing is way more popular outside of Germany than
Right.
it is inside Germany. In fact, when you talk about this, you're easily being dismissed as a Nazi yourself. So even if whatever is your opinion on this, but it's really difficult to even address this subject without taking any perspective on it, because you have to fear for repercussions on your reputation. But I will do it anyway. So since I'm not living in Germany anymore, I'm living in Spain. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult for me to tell you whether there's something to it or not. I have a colleague, André Kramer, who is part of a German UFO association, GEP, and he wrote extensively on this. And he found out that many of the, if not most of the original rumors that were going on were based on documents and also on people's statements that are questionable, that are and as you see, I have never really researched this, because this is why I'm talking about this. So it's a lot about rumor and things going on, rumors that were expanded later on and developed over the years. However, there's two things I want to mention there. And this is, I would say, I would not exclude the possibility that the Germans had been developing technology like this. Because you know about Project Paperclip, right?
Sure.
I don't know how many scientists were brought to the United States and continuing their research for the United States. This was not about flying saucers, of course, officially, but how do we know? Because there's no way to find out. If you go to the German political archives, which I did, which is the archives, the national archives of the Office for Exterior Politics, for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So if you go to the political archives and you look for files from World War II or even before that, you will see that there are huge gaps. And that is, and they openly admit that it is because when Germany lost the war, the Allied powers came and they took all the files and brought them home and analyzed them, and then they brought some of them back. So you see, we don't really know much about our own history, especially, I guess, not about things that the Allied powers who won the war wanted to conceal. So this is just one thing that I would like to remind everyone, that when we talk about German history based upon official files, we may not have the full image, the complete picture. And also, and that is something that I never talk about, but I think this is the first time I say this publicly, is that I met several people who told me things that I had heard from other people. There was, for example, one nurse who had been working in an elderly people's home, and she said that she was responsible for caring for a person who shortly before his death said that he was part of a project that they were developing this kind of stuff, flying saucer technology somewhere in the north, Peenemünde or something.
Yeah.
So I even met one Danish person who was very old. I met him at a UFO conference in Copenhagen, I think in 2012. He told me that at the last day of World War II, when he wanted to go to school, there was no one there because they were saying, okay, the war is over, everything, and they were living in a region up north in Denmark, which was occupied by the Germans.
Right.
So on his way back home on his bicycle, he was going on that one road that the Germans had constructed, which led exactly passed by an officer's house, and there was an air defense installation, air defense rocket installation on the other side. And when he passed that house, he claims that he heard a strange noise, and he looked to that house, and he saw that like the German Nazi flying saucer is lifting up behind that house and shooting up in the air, and he suspects that this was the flying saucer that brought the officers home or something, So when he told me that, I didn't, as you know, what do you think of that? So I wanted to find out. So the year after I met him, I traveled to Denmark. I put him in my car and we drove up north there 2.5 hours or so. He was very, like he was 89 or he was really old, but he knew, he remembered exactly where that was. He led me to that place, and everything that he had explained to me before and on the way to that place was what we found there, like the street, his old school, the places that he talked about. And he looked, and to me, he seemed to be credible. But now the problem is, what does that prove? It doesn't prove anything at all. It is just, after all, it's just a story. And that's so difficult when you work as a journalist in this field. It's so difficult to discern fact from fiction. And also there are people who just make up things to make themselves more interesting, which also happens, So unless we have another source confirming this, or any other documents or any documentation about this, it will be really difficult to prove that the Nazi UFO thing was real.
Yeah, it's difficult for sure. I've got a question here from my colleague in the UK, Graham Rendell, who's written extensively on kind of the Foo Fighters, and he's looked a lot in the National Archives here in the UK. And he wants to know if you've ever come across any specific cases of Luftwaffe pilots encountering UFOs and Foo Fighters.
No. But I have to say, I've never really studied the historic Foo Fighters or German World War. I'm an anti-war guy.
Right.
When we were obliged to go, we had civil service, compulsory civil service, but you could also go to do compulsive military service.
Okay.
And compulsory military service. And you can also choose to do civil service, which lasts like 4 months longer. And I went for the civilian thing because I never wanted to be under some command of some officer who tells me go and go and crawl in the mud or something, So I had this intense dismay about everything civilian, and it's an irony that now I'm talking to so many militaries and pilots. But I talked to German pilots, but no Luftwaffe pilots. Oh, by the way, Project Paperclip was not. That's the American project. Also, the British brought some German scientists to the United Kingdom. There was one guy who had invented something like energy production device based upon some unknown principle. It was called the Kohler, COLER, energy device. He was brought to the United Kingdom, and many others were brought to the Soviet Union. So Germany was at that point in time had been at least an important center of technological innovation. And of course, one must wonder where that innovation comes from or came from, and why they brought all the scientists to their countries. So I guess there's lots of stories that we have never heard about this and that are still to be discovered.
Yeah, no, it's very interesting indeed, but it's hard and you can only really speculate on it. So no, I appreciate that. Now, at the time of recording of this interview, this past week, we had a new video come out from Jeremy Corbell and George Knapp, the jellyfish UAP. So I'd like to ask, obviously, your views on that video, but also, these kind of leaks in general, how you kind of perceive them.
So I very much admire the work of George Knapp, and Jeremy Corbell are doing an extraordinary job talking to those. I mean, we must not forget that they were among the first ones to talk to David Grush,
Yeah.
And also George Knapp is I met him personally a couple of years ago. I've interviewed him twice or three times or so. He's the real deal. Like he's a real good journalist. And so when they decide to publish something, I can assure you and everyone that if they publish that, they really think about this very much, whether we should do it and how we should present it and if we should do it at all,
Yeah.
And so knowing that this is, after all, it's just a video that doesn't prove anything. Like any other object that you see, that you present, any piece of evidence can be falsified, can be hoaxed, can be, but if they decide to publish that, then it is really worth having a look at it, I think. They may be wrong, they may be right, but at least if it comes from them, I think it's really worth looking at it. Now, I looked at it. It looks weird. What else can I tell you? I'm
Sure.
not. I don't know
Yeah.
where that video comes from. I don't know. I don't know anything about this. It's really difficult. And I'm a member of 3 UFO organizations in Germany. One of which does or regularly publishes the kind of reports that they receive. There are many videos among them. People from private citizens. And it's sometimes you see astounding stuff, and then you get the explanation by those experts who have analyzed this, and it turns out that it's some mundane explanation that you had never thought about, So I'm not an expert in analyzing videos, UAP videos, but I think that if they say that this is from a military source, and for the military it was an interesting video. I mean, what do you think, Vinny?
I think I'd rather see these videos in the public domain. And like you said, with the information that George and Jeremy put with it, that this is a military case, that the military thought that it was a genuine UAP, it was an unidentified object. I find that enough. I know it's not going to move the needle that far forward in the bigger picture of the subject, but I'd rather see this and get an idea of what's being seen, where it's being seen. We're seeing a lot of these videos coming out of the Middle East and active war zones. I find that quite interesting. So yeah, I think it's good. I think it's a positive, and yeah, it's not going to break this subject wide open with one video, but yeah, I see the positive in it for sure.
I think that the general public always or very much focuses on individual UFO sightings, and could this be a real UFO? I mean, the question itself is funny, because could this be a real unidentified thing? What does it actually mean?
Sure. Yeah.
And also, if you think about the term UFO, we don't know if it's an object or if it's plasma or something. We don't know if it's flying or what if it's just a projection.
Right.
So the only thing that leaves us is the U for unidentified. So I think this whole discussion, but there are more interesting things that, like, I mean, I don't know. Have you been wondering as well, what else may there be behind disclosure? What else may there be that prevents them from disclosing this? I mean, what if this is not just about crashed saucers and not just about potential, the spiritual paranormal thing, but what if there's a covert political power structure
Right.
that
Yeah.
has
Yeah.
been dealing with this for decades, because that is what everything is hinting towards, right? Like Marco Rubio mentioned that during an interview with News Nation. I think that he said that there are those people who have contacted them, and they said what they disclose is problematic. He says that because if it's true what they're saying, it means that within the US government there's a group of people who believes that they wouldn't have to share what they have with anyone, not even with elected officials, who they only look at as temporary government people, like an
Right.
internal military complex which governs itself and which doesn't report to anybody. So a secret world government, like the deep state structure,
Yeah.
And I don't know what you think about this one witness that Stephen Greer presented at his event, Michael Herrera. You heard about him?
I have. Yeah, I've watched some of his interviews. It's very compelling testimony, but again, it's like you said earlier, it's just a story. It's his word against everything. How I put it on the proverbial table and leave it there until it can be either dismissed or corroborated. Like everything else in this subject, it's very difficult to know where to put it or what to do with it until it's got conclusive yes or no evidence and data to back it up. So again, with Michael Herrera, that's very much in the same vein.
Yeah. However, the idea of a deep state structure is nothing new.
True.
I mean, President Eisenhower warned about something like that in his 1961 farewell address to the nation, right? And also during the Iran-Contra affair in end of the 1980s, it came out that the CIA had delivered tanks and anti-aircraft systems to Iran, and without the House of Representatives and Senate knowing. And with the money that they got from these illegal activities, they financed the Contras, the guerrilla war against the socialist Sandinist government of Nicaragua. And then they also found out that the Contras had smuggled several tons of cocaine into the United States and sold it, and used all that money from their from the drugs for their fight against the socialist government in Nicaragua. And the CIA knew about all of this, but they didn't do anything about it. It was a huge scandal. And interestingly, Senator Daniel Inouye, who was the chairman of the Iran-Contra investigative committee at that time, said in his closing remarks that the hearing had led to questions which went by far further than the Iran-Contra affair itself. So he said the investigation had revealed the vision of a secret government that does not report to any elected official, not even the president himself. He calls it, Senator Inouye called it, a shadow government with its own air force, its own navy, its own funding mechanism, and the power to pursue their own ideas of national interest, free from all control and even the law itself. And isn't it interesting that it was the same Senator Inouye who later participated in getting funds for ORSEP together with
Harry Reid. Yeah.
So I think that whatever is there, I think this is not just about some crashed saucers or something, and private industry hiding it up. I think there may be disclosure of this kind of technology may also reveal the existence of deep state structures. And I think if this is true, because we're talking about a deep state structure that not only has its own agenda and does whatever it can, but if this is true, what Marco Rubio calls problematic, then they also possess alien technology. So they may have capabilities that we cannot even imagine. And if that is true, then this has to end. And I think if this is true, this could also be a reason why there's this big bipartisan support in U.S. Congress about this, because if this is true, then all the elected officials there, all the people in Congress know that, in fact, if this is true, they have nothing to decide. They don't have power. So this has to stop.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And again, if following and adding a point to that, if it is true, then it would also seem that maybe they're losing their grip on this secret that they have held for so long. Maybe a lot of these people involved in the deep state are dying off. Maybe it's a generational thing and they're just losing their grip. And this is the final grasp to keep it hidden. And it seems, in a way, that they may be losing that. So who knows? It's good to kind of theorize and hypothesize about these because, like you said, we have heard it before from different places. So yeah, it's interesting.
So what do you think was going to happen in 2024?
I mean, I don't like making future predictions, but I will say that if we can continue seeing forward momentum at any pace, even if it's slow, I'm happy with that. I will continue doing my work to try and in some way add to the positive movement of the subjects. I'd like to see more. I'd like to see the US Congress staying on top of this and not just giving up if things don't go in a certain direction. It's hard to say. I'd rather it be done properly than it be done completely wrong and we just lose grasp. But we've got another 80 years of cover-ups. That would be the worst. So, But listen, Robert, before we finish, I really want to ask you about this book that you've got coming up for release, I believe, towards the end of the month. So could you give us an overview of what made you write it, what it's about, and things like that?
Okay, so it's called Sie sind hier, was jetzt? So they are here, what now? Right. And it's a book for the German audience. So I think the audience of your show is very well informed about all of this, and they wouldn't need to read this. But this is a book that I wrote for the general population in Germany who has never heard about UFOs. And it was basically almost finished when David Grush came along,
right.
And I had to rewrite it all over. And but it helped me find a new structure and elaborate upon certain things. And actually, what has never been really discussed is that this is a fact. This has become a geopolitical reality now. We have to deal with the possibility that that there is a non-human intelligence that is actively pursuing its own agenda on our planet, and it becomes even more important since we have to think about the possibility that they have always been here and doing this. So what does this all mean for mankind? And isn't it about time to do something about it? Because now that the United States is actively trying to promote I'm not saying the United States, certain parts of United States academia and intelligence and military are pursuing this, but they are very successful in what they are doing. It will have repercussions worldwide. And I think the question is also, how do we as Europeans, for example, deal with this fact? How do we deal with this? And so I go a lot into this. What I did was I wanted to write a book which is like the standard book on UFOs that you need to read as a German,
Sure.
who has had his UFO knowledge from television shows so far. The one book that you have to read to be able to participate in the discussion with an informed opinion. And that's what I did. And I'm not only focusing on the United States situation, because we hear a lot about this also in Germany. Like a typical question is, why do the UFOs only land in America? That's what you hear from Germans
all the time.
But in fact, it's a worldwide. I compiled a list of 30 countries where military and intelligence services have published files on this and have dealt with this officially. There are 9 countries where there are investigative bodies of the government, like in France or in the United States.
Right.
So the situation. So I also bring a lot of parallels. What is being said in the United States and how that relates to what is known from other places, like the Canary Islands, for example. There's an interesting phenomenon there, you know. So that's what I talk about. And this, you know, I still have to wait another 10 days before it comes out on January 22nd. And it is just so difficult for me to wait, you know.
Yeah, no, I can
I've
imagine.
worked 16 years on this book, you know, and
Wow.
I just hope that no other whistleblower will come out before it comes out. So 10 days of suspense.
Yeah, that's amazing. I wish you all the best with the release of the book and that.
Thank you so much.
And it's been a great to see you again, have this conversation. I really appreciate you joining me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Vinny. And I hope to see you soon somewhere in the world moderating a UFO conference this excellent way as you did last time in Paris when we met there.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. To everyone watching, as always, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, comment, and share the video with your friends. But for now, we'll see you on the next one. Take care. Goodbye.